Today I'll show you how I made my HERA civilian Twi'lek outfit. I did the headband last time. Check out that video if you're interested, I'll link it below. This pattern includes top, pants, boot covers and accessories and is available in my Etsy shop. Click the link in the description to get it. There's also a bundle with headband and leku all together. All you need to build this yourself is, for the top, red fabric, maybe even with a fitting pattern, brown pleather or jersey bias tape. For the pants, dark brown fabric and a fitting bias tape. For the accessories, brown pleather, stretchy yellow fabric, lining fabric, 2 and 5mm foam. For the boot and leg covers, stretchy fabric of your choice. As crafting tools you'll need a Dremel, a heat gun, filler, primer and paint, scissors, a box cutter, bobbins or fabric clips, fabric glue and contact cement, a mask for gluing, sewing chalk, basic sewing equipment, and of course a sewing machine. I'll link you the products I used in the video description. Now let's get started. I started on the top and cut out all parts I needed from my red fabric. Since it frayed a lot and I'm not lining the top, I hemmed all parts as seen here. Then I pinned the front pieces together and sewed down both sides. Do the same with the two back sides. The back stays open in the middle to add a zipper later. Now you can close the 4 remaining seams, adding the back pieces to the front piece on each side and on the top straps, essentially forming a little crop top. This is how it looks right now. I now crafted this little stamp made from 5mm foam to create the fabric pattern on the top. The stamp pattern is also included in the PDF, by the way. If your fabric is patterned to fit the design, you can skip this step. Otherwise, use fabric paint to do the paint stamps. Be careful and do trials on scrap fabric first to not mess up the top. This took a while, so a cat intervention was necessary. Oh, she's so cute! Finally finished with the pattern on the top. I did the same thing with the missing top circle piece, and this is how it looked like now. After ironing, the top circle could finally be added to the rest of the top. Then the lower edge of the top circle should be hemmed as seen here. Now it's time to add either bias tape or the brown pleather to the open edges of the top. I used some pleather leftovers and therefore didn't need to keep the seam allowance here. If you use bias tape, you can also keep it and cut it shorter later. I painfully traced my pattern edges by laying them out and added 2 cm on each side. I'm not going into detail here as you could easily do this with bias tape, but apparently I like to torture myself with unnecessary details. Anyways, I sewed it down, carefully pinned corners where needed to get them to look sharp and crisp, and afterwards glued the seam allowance of the brown pleather down on the inside since I chose to not line the top. Not gonna lie, this technique looks really crisp in the end result. It's more work than the bias tape though. After that, it was time to add the zipper. I just shortened it to the length of my top, pinned it to try it on, and then sewed it in. I will link a tutorial on zippers as well as bias tape in the description for you. Then I cut down the remaining seam allowance and hemmed it to the zipper insides. And you're finished with the top already. Let's move on to the accessories. These include a choker, a waistband and an arm cuff. I used the brown pleather and the thick lining fabric as a base for all of them. Pinned them and stitched the fabrics together using a zigzag stitch. When I was done with all the parts, I used fabric glue on the edges to glue them inside. Be careful to leave out the side that will be hidden underneath Velcro to make it less bulgy. Then you can start adding Velcro to the pieces. On the glue side, you'll put the Velcro underneath and hand sew it on. On the open edge, you will put the Velcro on top and use your machine to stitch it to the fabric. After that, it's time for some foam crafting. I cut out all pieces from 2mm foam except the biggest and the 2 pieces that look like push buttons. These are 5mm foam. I decided to bevel the pieces using my Dremel. This is totally up to you, but of course the other pieces had to fit the bevels then, so I had to cut them a little smaller. Looking smooth. I also beveled the next piece a bit, added the guidelines from the pattern to the foam and glued it on. I also did this with the other missing pieces. Then I heat sealed the foam and shaped it to fit my arm. After that, I prepared the extra 2 foam pieces for the waistband and glued my yellow stretch fabric to it. This was a bit complicated as my fabric was just bias tape and almost too small, but it worked out in the end. These yellow pieces can now be glued to the belt with contact cement. I primed the arm cuff details with hex flex, then painted it with acrylics and washed the color down with a dark wash in the end. I then glued it to the arm cuff, and the details are all done. For the pants I once again started with cutting out all fabric parts as mentioned in the pattern. I then started with sewing the crotch seams together first, front and back. After that, I decided which side of the leg slits I'll leave open for the zipper and sewed the other side shut as seen here. I then started with the waistband and sewed together front and back parts like this. After that, I put right on right side and sewed the waistband and the mirrored parts together. Be careful that you leave the same side open that you also left open to add the zipper on the pants. Now you can turn it around, iron it and sew the waistband to the pants. This is how it should look like afterwards. It's time to add the zipper. As already said for the top, I'll link a zipper tutorial in the description of this video. Before we close the leg seams, we'll add the pants detail on each side. First cut them out, iron the seam allowance to the inside and use fabric glue to add your brown jersey bias tape around. Then hem the piece on the upper border. Afterwards you can carefully pin it to the pants and sew around to secure it. On the side with the zipper, you have to start and stop the seam earlier, as long as needed for the zipper. You can close the rest up with Velcro as seen here. It's time to close the leg seam. Carefully pin and sew around. Then we can move on to the leg cuffs. Sew them to each other right on right side on the lower end, and then in on themselves, forming a loop. After that, turn them around and iron them. With my overlock, I now ruffled the pant ends. This can be done manually or with a basting stitch too. Then I pinned the cuffs to the ends and stitched around, ironed it and boom. The pants are done too. Now onwards to the boot covers. I added you the pattern for my boots in size EU 38, but here you can see how to do one for your size if needed. Cut out all pieces from your stretchy fabric. I also did the ones for the legs already here. I then hemmed the pieces because they were fraying quite a bit. I first started to sew boot covers, inside and outside pieces together as seen here. For all upper seams on the boot straps, I ironed the seam allowance to the inside and used a zigzag stitch to secure it. Then I pinned the pieces to the before sewn boot cover inside. When done pinning, stitch around the piece to secure them in place. Now you can pin the boot cover sole into place and sew around. Be careful, this is a quite complicated seam. Then you can close the back seam on the boot covers and hem around all open fabric ends. It is time to put it on the boot and secure the wraps on themselves with glue wherever needed, as I did here. Perfect! Once I was finished, I did the second one before moving on to the leg wraps. These I first had to hem. That took me quite a while. After that, I placed them down on the leg wrap base. If I'd had more material, I would have added a few extra for more irregularity, but it was already just scrap fabric, so it was the best I could do. Feel free to add more if you can. I sewed them down using my overlock and kept the pins for now. Then I could already close the seam on the base wrap. Turn it around and repeat all steps with the second one. As a last step, I hand stitched the wraps where the pins were to keep them in place when wearing and added a silicone band to keep them from slipping on my legs. And that's it! You're done! I'm so happy how this came together! I also added some weathering on all the pieces in the end. I can't wait for your creations with my patterns, so if you followed along, please tag me in your work in progress content. I'd love to see. Thank you guys! Bye bye!